Hello, everybody.
Hi, Paul.
I'm just waiting for, there's a couple people logging on right now.
Oh,
Nice
Amaro
to,
was coming on, eh?
nice to see the same people joining every time. It's like we're a bunch of run
Yes,
groupies. Awesome.
yes. We really want to know what's going on, Alan. All right, I'm going to start because I do want to be mindful of the time that Ray has joined us. So thanks everyone for joining us today again. Welcome to another edition of Runversations. If you don't know, my name is Paul Hubahib. In a minute, I will introduce our guests. And if you have a question for him, just as previous Runversations, please message me in the chat box and I'll let you know when it's your turn to ask your question. And when we begin, if I can ask you to please mute your audio so we can keep the background noise down. So in saying that, I want to introduce our guest today. Hold on a second here. So he's an ultra runner, adventurer, and a very proud Canadian, and he has quite a lot of kilometers under his feet. He has run in some of the coldest places on Earth, but he has also run in some of the hottest places on Earth. And just to give you an idea of what he has done, in 2006, he ran across the Sahara Desert, 7,500 kilometers over 111 days. In 2009, he trekked across the geographic South Pole, and that was 1,130 kilometers solely on foot and snowshoes. In 2011, he became the first person to run the length of the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, which is widely known as the driest place on Earth. He ran 1,200 kilometers in 20 days. And that's just a small piece of what he's done across his career. He's an author, a husband, a proud father, and someone I greatly admire. Please welcome Ray Zahab.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks so much. It's great to be here, everyone. And so stoked. I'm bummed that the marathon isn't happening this year. I loved visiting last year and like totally awesome vibe there, and got to run some of the trails, which you guys have some nice trails there too. So actually,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what? Truth be told, I haven't told anybody this, but like one of the gnarliest ankle twists I've had in a long time was on your trails,
Oh,
which
no.
I didn't. I guess maybe I just went out and I was thinking, oh, it won't be that bad. It won't be that. It's not like where I live in Quebec, right, where it's just crazy like elevations and stuff. And
Yeah.
sure enough, when you least expect it, right over on the ankle. But
Well,
it was a memorable ankle roll. So
at least you didn't
that's
fall
the
into the
upside.
water, right? You didn't fall
Yeah,
anywhere near.
exactly. Could be worse, right? So,
And
but
so, how have you been, you and your family, during these days of COVID?
well, I've talked a lot about it. I've actually been on a lot of podcasts, and obviously now that Zoom is the thing, I mean, I find it very interesting. I have to be honest with you because we transitioned. I had a really busy year last year. I was speaking all over the world, and I was like, doing expeditions all over the place. I was guiding clients all over. I had an amazing year. It was just everything was going great, and I did this Arctic expedition in January, this past January, a solo project, and then I went to Siberia to guide some clients on Lake Baikal in February, and then when I came home, COVID started, right? Like, I mean, it was like sort of like full on, right? And I went from like a great income last year to like zero income this year. Every one of my businesses, anything I do in business, is completely related to travel. Like it requires me moving around, right? And whether I'm on expeditions or even the nonprofit work with my foundation is all based on me being able to travel. And so, with everything coming to a standstill, I thought to myself, wow, like I could totally freak out about this and stress about having absolutely no income. I could stress about my businesses imploding. And there's a lot of things to lose sleep over, but I made a conscious decision that I was gonna not like I was not that I was gonna not worry about it, but I wasn't gonna let it consume me during
Right.
COVID. And instead I started looking towards doing other things, right? Doing other things. We've always been a very active family. My daughters are expert Nordic skiers. My wife's an ultra runner. And so we do stuff together anyhow. But we started doing stuff together every day, and we live right on the trails. And so we started having, family adventures. And then, one thing leads to another, and you realize and you see that you're part of a global change. We're all part of it, and the world is changing. I mean, look at all of us. We're on this crazy, having this video conference on a Zoom call. If you asked me 6 months ago, let's do a Zoom call, I'd have to ask one of my kids to tell. I had no idea what a Zoom call was. I had no idea. Now it's like a normal mode of communicating with people all over the world. So give you a really long answer to a short question, out of something that could have been tremendously awful, and don't get me wrong, it's horrible. Thousands and thousands of people have died. So many people are permanently injured from this and have ill or lost someone they love, etc. But from it, there's, I think, been some positives where we're appreciating more some of those things that perhaps we were taking for granted before. Just little things that are less important, like when you go to Starbucks and your latte is not exactly the right, not that I ever get lattes, but you go there and it's not the exact right temperature and you freak out, right? Well, now you don't even care. You'd be happy to get a cup of coffee and sit at the table in the Tim Hortons or the Starbucks in your town and whatever, right? Like, I mean, it's just, we've come to a different place. And I think that we will come out of this as human beings. It's like an adventure. It's like being on an expedition. Every day you get through each day, and there's different hurdles in each day. But if you focus and dwell on only the negative, you're never going to get out of it, right? And then after COVID, you won't even know where to begin. But instead, you adapt to the current situation you're in, and you find daily goals to get you through.
So I actually love the analogy of that this is just one big expedition for us, right? And we'll get through that at some point. So I think many people in their lives, they have epiphanies or turning points or moments in their lives. And for you, December 31st, 1999 was a very transforming night for you. And for those that don't know, can you just talk about the importance of that day and how it changed after that?
Well, it's so long ago now, it seems to me, but I mean, as you hear a lot in running is something that's very transformational for people, right? And so you hear a lot of those stories, and my story is no different, really. I was a pack-a-day smoker, a very unhappy person. I was a person who never finished anything they started. I never completed my education, all these things, right? And sort of bounced from one thing to the next, never really being passionate about anything in my life. And now this was the late 90s. This is obviously social media, almost pre-internet, but not quite. But you know what I mean? We weren't like as connected, right? And so, I think I was very lucky. I was very lucky. I am very lucky to have a younger brother who's an amazing athlete, adventure athlete, and he does every sport and he does it well, like from rock climbing to mountain biking to paddling to triathlon, running, etc. And he was the one that sort of inspired me to want to find something different in my life, or find like a little bit of passion or whatever. And I make the joke, and I've made it often, and it's true, that if he was an electrician, we'd be talking about wiring your house, or if he was a plumber, we'd be talking about plumbing your house. I mean, it was that he was so passionate about something, and it happened to be doing stuff in the outdoors, that I thought, well, maybe I should just do whatever he does. That's how I got into it. There was no big grand plan. And it was a few years after quitting smoking a pack a day that I actually started running. And I raced mountain bikes. So you and I were talking about that, Paul. I became a passionate mountain biker and climber. Less rock, more ice climbing with my brother.
Right.
And over the course of 3 years, adventure raced a ton, did all that kind of stuff, but really was a passionate mountain biker, like really loved mountain bike racing, got into that in a big way. And then I read an article about ultra marathons, and I thought, wow, this is neat. I bet you my brother would love this, right? And so I wasn't really a runner. I'd ran a handful of times for adventure races and stuff, but I was a mountain biker. I wasn't a runner. And my brother had run frequently marathons, which I just thought was an absurd distance for human beings of any kind to run. But lo and behold, I'm reading about an article where people run 100 miles. And I'm thinking to myself, this is ridiculous, right? Like, I've done a lot of really adventure-y things in the 3-4 years before reading this article, but this was like on a different level. This was a race in the Yukon where people run for 160 kilometers or other chosen distances. And you're more or less, not that you're completely self-sufficient, but you have to drag all of your emergency gear with you in a sled and all this jazz. And so I'm reading about all this, and I just thought it was so compelling that people could do this sort of feat of endurance, that I was inspired by the photos of the people in this article that I was reading and that I would researched online, that they all seemed like all of us, right? That we're all just normal people, and these are normal people doing something so extraordinary. And I thought, wow, I'd really like to know what that's like. And so, having never really done any formal running race, I decided it was probably a good decision for me to give this a try, right? So I entered it, and long story short, I won it, and it was my first running race. And as I mentioned, and it was, the story, Paul, 160K in the winter in the Yukon. I mean, it was tough. It was not as well attended as the Niagara Marathon, let's just say. But to complete anything like that on my own, on my feet, going from point A to point B, I couldn't believe that I was able to do it. And it's a much longer story, and I don't want to take a whole hour. But I'm talking about it because you can tell I tell long stories. But it was an epiphany for me, and it wasn't about me in general. It was that running is, I realized, such an amazing teacher, that we can learn so much as human beings from it. And I think we underestimate ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally. And I think running is one of those sports that really, it's very simple. It's very cut and dry. And when you commit yourself to it, whether it's 1 kilometer, the first kilometer you ever run getting off the couch, or it's 5 kilometers, or you transition to whatever it is, the marathon or the ultra marathon, in each of those is a tremendous growth period and a internal sort of thing that you learn about yourself that's so compelling. And it's about being a human being. It's not just
Right.
about being a runner,
Well, in that first race too, you hadn't run more than 60 kilometers prior to that 160, right?
Yeah, well, the 60 that you talk about. So in preparation, I had, after reading the article, I can't remember exactly, but I had a number of months, 3 months or something, 4 months to prepare for this race. And I was in really good shape from mountain biking. Like, I'd be 4 or 5 hours a day on my mountain bike. So I was in really good physical cardiovascular shape. But I got a friend of mine to teach me running technique. And so I live in a very hilly place in Chelsea, Quebec. I live in the Gatineau Park here. So it's very hilly. And so I was out he's teaching me on the trails how to run, and it was going into winter. And so then I decided at some point I should probably do a really long run hike if I'm going to do this race. And so I went with a buddy of mine, and I'll never forget, it was 60K. And I remember we mostly ran about 25 kilometers of it, 30 kilometers. But after that, and I was dragging the sled that I would use in the race. And we were going across lakes and all this stuff that were frozen. And I remember turning back. It was like a big circle that we did, and we were up in the Gatineau Park. We're coming back to Chelsea, and I'm thinking, I said to him at 40K, I said, oh my God, we might have to call somebody. Like, I don't know if I can actually make it back to Chelsea where I live. We may have to call someone. And so we made it back. It was a crawl. It was an absolute crawl. We made it back. And in this little apartment that I was living in at the time, we ordered a couple of large pizzas, and literally I passed out. I had this futon in my apartment, and I passed out on it. And I woke up the next day with the pizza box there open. And it was just exhausted. And it was when I woke up after that, I thought to myself, oh man, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this race, But then, in the race, and again, I don't want to dwell on it, but
Yeah.
so many things happened, and one step led me to another. And then I just became I became, as corny as it sounds, I became freed from all of this inhibition and thinking I couldn't do it, and the talking myself out of doing stuff, and blah, blah, blah. It all just kind of disappeared out there
Right.
in the freezing cold, scared to death, starving, sore, sick of running Arctic. And it all just kind of figured itself out, and I got so dialed into what I was doing that all the pain went away, everything went away. And by the end of that race, I was flying. I was hammering down that trail at the 160K mark,
Did you ever have any indications early on in life that you could handle such extreme situations?
Good question. I grew up on a farm. My parents had a hobby farm. They had horses and rabbits and a garden, and I can't remember what other animals we had. And we'd bale hay, for hours on end with the other farmers, and
Yeah.
that, because we were all, my nearest neighbor was 25 acres away, I used to say. And so we'd all pitch in and bale. This was in the Ottawa Valley. And so, no, I don't think so. I mean, not really. I mean, you'd run down the road to get to one of the barns where some of the horses were and stuff, but it wasn't like I wasn't in track. I wasn't a sporty kid. As a matter of fact, and I've wrote about this, I was very anxious when it came to phys ed and gym class. And because I hated being around a ball. Like, I just hate, because like, if I was in a sport where the ball came to me, I'd purposely like try to position myself to not be near the ball, because I hated the responsibility of having the ball, because I can't throw the ball, right? And all this. Anyhow, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because watching our daughters, my wife is laughing, watching our daughters, they're just beautiful girls, but watching them throw the softball around, it's like, make sure the neighbors aren't watching, we love to throw the ball. Anyhow, it's fun. It's funny. So, but these kids, they ski and run like adults. It's crazy, it's amazing.
Well, good. Amar, you had a question?
Ray, first of all, it's a privilege having you on here. I watch your YouTube video. I'm like looking at it, I'm like, oh my God, like how can anybody even do those miles? One thing, I was fascinated with all the things that you've seen, but one thing I was looking at is your training, running through the cold, then also in the desert. Do you prefer running in the heat, or do you prefer running in the cold?
It's a great question, Amar, and thank you for that. There's so many people out there running extraordinary distances. I think one of the things that I love so much about ultra running, and especially of recently, is there's been an explosion in the sport. And I think, and I'll get to the answer to your question in a sec, but I want to say this, is that I think it's pretty amazing how, if you told somebody you were going to run a marathon even 10 years ago, they'd say, what's wrong with you? You got a problem? Are you running from something? Like, it was always like, and now it's accepted, right? Like there was a time when you didn't really know anybody that did an Ironman. Now it's like, many people, right? So it's become, people have desensitized themselves to what their potential might be. So there's so many people running vast distances, and it's really compelling for me, and it's inspiring for me. And I love seeing that. I love running in the heat. I've done, I think, over 17,000 kilometers on my feet on expeditions. So that doesn't include the ultra marathons that I raced in previous to running the Sahara expedition. And I got to tell you, I have an easier time in the extreme heat. And I've been in some really extreme heat. Last year, myself and a friend of mine from the US, who's, I would say, like a Death Valley kind of specialist, we crossed Death Valley together, west to east, completely off road, with the exception of a little bit of Jeep track and stuff. And we went over the 8,000 foot Panamint Mountain Range, right down below sea level through the Badwater Basin in the middle of July, beginning of July. Exceptionally hot. Like, it had to be 50 plus degrees Celsius plus humidity in the center of Death Valley. And I prefer that to minus 60, minus 65. I've been in wind chills even lower than that, but I can do it. I can do both extremes. And the trade-off for me in the colder places, like, I love being in the Canadian Arctic in the middle of winter. To me, it is the most beautiful place on earth. And I love being there. It's just that I'm there and it's like freaking cold, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is so cold, but it's kind of worth it, But it's, like the Northern Lights behind you. I was going to make a joke earlier that it looked like you were like either a mystic or you were like on the Starship Enterprise or something on some planet.
No, actually, I changed that strictly for today, because I'm imagining when you're running up in the North Pole with those lights.
Well, yeah, I've seen a lot of Northern Lights in my time. It's spectacular. Yeah.
I can imagine.
It's beautiful.
Ray, is there a different mindset when you're preparing for an expedition versus a stage race?
Well, they're two completely different things, right? So right away, they're two completely different things. Stage racing is great. It's awesome. I loved all the races I ever did. I loved every one of them. The difference with the expeditions that I'm doing now, I would say, is that I am navigating. I'm mapping a route. from point A to point B across a desert or cold region of the planet, whether it's Siberia or Antarctica or the Arctic. And I'm navigating, I'm finding my way, right? And I'm figuring out logistically, can I go unsupported, meaning completely self-contained? Am I going alone? Am I going with someone else? Am I supported? Like in the case of a hot desert expedition, you can't physically carry all of the water you would need to cross the desert and run at the same time. So, am I, how's that looking? Like, for example, when I crossed the Atacama Desert, I knew it was going to be ridiculously difficult. There's very little information available. I had a lot of friends in Chile that helped me to put together the route. It took a year to plan that route. And then I went on limited resupplies. So in that photo you had up of me at the beginning, it's like a bigger backpack. And even though I had resupplies during the day, I was only getting resupplies in 50-degree heat. Every 20 to 50 kilometers was my resupplies. And I was trying to do over 70K a day. My average came down to like 60K a day because I had a couple of bad days. But, let's call it 70K a day or whatever. And I'm running straight cross country through mountains, salt flats, whatever, for the vast majority of the expedition. So the challenges are different. It's like, where could a vehicle, a four-wheel drive, physically get to across this crazy rubbly desert? Like, they can't go where I run. So they've got to go all the way around and find a spot. And so we determine those GPS waypoints where I'm going to get a resupply, for example, in the hotter places. So all of this takes a tremendous amount of planning,
I can imagine. Has there a resupply team never been at the point where they were supposed to meet you at?
Yeah, that's happened. That happened in the Atacama, actually. And so I went 50K in that case, a little over 50 without a resupply, and was out of water at the 35K mark. And so you can imagine in that heat, it is intensely hot. I can't even describe. And, you think, is this going to be it? Right. But but again, the last minute, boom, there they were. It was like the cavalry riding in, and they found me. And it was because I was unbeknownst to me, I was in a mining area that these mines in Chile, it's like, there's a term for it, and it escapes me at this exact moment, but it's like you've staked your claim, right? And it's this mining area is massive. And I'm nowhere near any roads. I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's like mountains here, and I'm running through this desert. It's an open desert, and I'm thinking, where are these guys? And I call them on the sat phone. Where are you guys? We're at the mining gate. You're on a mine. You're in a mine. I said, there's no mine. There's nothing here. Yes, you are. There's a gate and guards at the road. We can't get to you. We're like 20 kilometers, away from me in a straight line. Like, sort of, if I was heading north south, they were basically west of me, right? And so I'm thinking, oh, geez. So they eventually got permission and found me on my last breaths, and rehydrated me.
Well, good. We have a question from Charles, and he's asking, as distances increase, the runs become more of a mental challenge than a physical challenge. At what point does the mental take over from the physical, and at what point does it become 99% mental?
Well, you know what? That's a great question, actually. Thank you, Charles. And I've said since the beginning, when I did Running the Sahara, that I find that the things that I'm doing, these challenges, are 90% mental. The other 10% is all in your head. It really is a mental game, much more than a physical. When anything you do, when you prepare for it, your first 5K, it's 10K, 100K, whatever it is, you physically prepare for what is going to be physically relative difficult, right? So it's relative to each of us as individuals, how hard something's going to be. And we take that on and we own that because we know we've committed to it. So yeah, it's going to be physically difficult to do for sure. But you get to a point in whatever it is that you're doing, as you say, where the mental aspect has to be the thing that is the most tuned, because at the end of the day, you're going to be relying on your head to get you through this thing much more than your feet. And that inevitably on an expedition, especially, things go wrong. If it can go wrong, I'm so careful when I'm on an expedition when things are going well to say anything like, wow, what a beautiful day. Anything like that. It's just inviting, exactly. Something's going to happen. And so it's how you get through it mentally. When injuries come on an expedition, how are you going to get through it? And I simplify and distill things down to very simple decisions. You know, it doesn't come down to, you know, I've got dysentery today, I'm dehydrated, I can't go any further, maybe I shouldn't run. The question when I open my eyes in my tent is, am I going to go out today? Am I going to go, or am I going to stay? And that's what it comes down to. Everything else is extraneous information. It doesn't matter what it is. Am I going or am I staying? And once I've committed to that decision, I'll figure out everything else. You know what I mean?
Right. And so you talked about before of how you met a lot of people while you've been running. What are some of the greatest lessons you've learned from those people that you've met?
Well, you know, I've learned tons from many people in many different places. When running across the Patagonian desert, which was about 1,000 kilometers in summer, most of the deserts I run across in the summer, and I try to go to the Arctic in winter. I've been to the Arctic in all seasons, but I try to go to the colder locations in the winter because I love the skies and the being in these places in their sort of most epic state, you know? So I love being, so in Patagonia, I met a gentleman in the middle of summer in the desert. He was a rancher, and he lived high up in this region, the Meseta region of the Patagonian desert, very close to the Andes. Just an old wise man who lived in this depression it was like a crater up in this Meseta region, where massive area, I can't remember the exact area, maybe 70,000 hectares, the Meseta, it's huge. And there's like 25, 30 families or whatever that lived in this region. And just how in tune he was with his environment, and how we had a completely different existence, that he was preparing for winter and all about grazing his livestock, knew and could sense the changes of the seasons, didn't need a calendar to do it. He's, you know, just really in tune with everything that makes up his life, right? Whereas I'm looking at my watch every 5 seconds, you know, because every second counts when I'm trying to run as far as I can every single day on an expedition.
Right.
When we ran across the Sahara Desert and being in Niger or Mali, and the generosity of people in small communities that, you know, from the economic spectrum at the time, these were countries that had such low GDP, you know, that, you know, they were nations that had very little, you know, annual disposable income. There's very low income and highly, from a financial perspective, impoverished nations, but so wealthy in a different way, I guess is the best way to put it. It's like learning from people in communities that we would run into that would make us food, you know, and sit with us and have food, and we'd spend time, and how happy everyone was if there was food to eat, if everybody was healthy, if there was people together that loved each other, that were hanging out and spending time together. And it was like a reprioritizing in my life of the things that I was taking for granted, that I realized that having the latest gadget wasn't necessarily the most important thing, that taking time and spending time, you know, now, I didn't have kids then, but now I reflect back to that time and what I learned on that expedition from the people and the generosity that they shared with us, that human connection and time we spend together is so critically important, because really you're only on the earth. What are you only on the earth for? I mean, if you're lucky, you make it to 80 or something. I don't know what the average is. So basically one kick at the can, right? So every time, you know, I'm doing some stuff with my daughters or my wife and our family, I remind myself, you know, they could be being fussy, the kids could be, things could be, but you know what, you got to slow down, just because this isn't going to be forever, you know. And so you realize the things that are forever as opposed to you know, things that aren't, like the latest gadgets. Right.
Okay, I got a deep question for you. So with each of these races and each of these expeditions, there must be some amazing moments of reflection on the human experience. And so has that really transcended into an ongoing spiritual growth for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what I would call it. I suppose so. I mean, I think it's just more of a, it's like a revelation, or maybe it's not even that. Maybe that's too strong a word, but it's a sincere and honest and authentic idea, or not. You know, it's a philosophy I have that I know is real, is that people underestimate themselves. We all do it at some point in our lives, right? We spend time doubting ourselves or fearing what others may think of what we would do or whatever. And you just realize that, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of what it is that you do. You got to do things for you, as long as you're not hurting others and whatever. But you got to do things that you want to do. I was talking to somebody earlier today about this, and we got into this sort of conversation about this. I said, if you are willing to work your ass off, you can make a good income in your life. You can make money, right? I mean, you can take care of yourself. You can take care of your family. You can make money. That's not an issue. But it's very hard in life to truly be happy. You got to work at being happy. And if you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I have a lot of passion in my life. I'm passionate about doing this. I've got this thing I love. Yeah, work sometimes sucks, but I've got this thing that I love doing. Doesn't matter what it is. Running, cooking, playing board games. I don't know what it is, but I got this thing that I'm so stoked about that it actually makes me happy. And I get genuine happiness. Well, you've won the lottery. Because a lot of people spend a lot of time and a lot of years not being happy, and having been on both sides of that, I can say for certain that I much prefer the glass half full than half empty,
Good for you. Good for you. So you've traveled really all over the world, but your expeditions have really shown that, there's a lot of beauty in our own country, right? In Canada.
Oh yeah. Canada. Are you kidding me? Look, it's 13 provinces and territories of awesomeness, It's been amazing seeing, social media, it's this double-edged sword, right? But I love seeing photos of our country. I've been in every province and territory numerous times. And, Canada's just amazing. What can you say? I mean, what can you say? I recently, every day I see something that makes me so proud to be a Canadian. Going back to, we all love running. We're all here. Running is our common denominator. And this is the 40th anniversary of Terry Fox's run, right? And I mean, that just says it all right there. What it is to be Canadian, right? And I've been following on Instagram and Facebook. The Terry Fox Foundation has been putting daily photos of Terry's run. I mean, it's just extraordinary, and he encapsulates that, Canadianness, right? And then again, from a geographical perspective, to go to visit the Canadian Arctic and, the histories of these regions and how beautiful they are it's just extraordinary. It's an amazing country.
What do you look for when you're deciding what your next expedition will be, and how long do they usually take to plan?
Well, depending on the logistical complications and the training required, it can take up to 3 or 4 years to prepare for one expedition. But I always have one that's happening, right? So it's kind of like I don't even know what it's kind of like, but like, this is happening, but I've been planning this before, and now this is going to happen, and then I'm planning, and it's kind of leapfrogging one another.
Right.
So, I attempted to cross Kamchatka Peninsula in Far East Russia in February 2019. I think that was, with Stefano Gregoretti from Italy. Is Italian explorer, very close friend of mine. He's superhuman physically, and we don't speak the same language. So I mean, it makes the expeditions interesting, right? But we communicate because we know what each other needs. Anyhow, we spend 19 days on the ice and through mountains, and just a really crazy year of weather that and that ended up stopping us on our expedition attempts, because the river systems were all wide open at the end of the second mountain range that we needed to cross, and it just simply was not safe to carry on any further. It was impossible to carry on any further. And that expedition took years to plan. Years, because it's, you're in a sensitive area, we're going, we're way in eastern Russia, beautiful place, amazing people too, but altering our diet so that we could exist in that expedition and perform at a high rate on mainly fat, because as fat calories per gram was lighter. So I had to change over, nutrition, training, everything. Just, it was a long period of time.
And you actually kind of touched on my next question, but how do you approach your nutrition?
I approach it specifically for the next thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
right? And the older I get, the harder it is, I kid with my friends, but it's kind of true because I've been living in Chelsea now for 20 years. I'm 51 and I'm faster now on my trails that I train on at 51 than I was when I was competing in ultra marathons and doing well in those races. And I attribute a lot of that to the older we get, the harder it is to recover. And you're just thinking, man, if I'm going to keep this up, I really got to watch what I eat. And I got to, everything's got to be so specific. And so I do all of those things to try and be in the best shape I possibly can be in so that it's like not easier to do, but still manageable to do.
So I know you're someone who likes to keep moving forward, but is there a race or expedition that seemed to teach you the most about yourself?
Uh, yeah, that's a tough one, Paul. I mean, it's been so many expeditions, and I think I learn something every time I go out. It's a funny thing. Somebody asked me the other day, "What's the toughest expedition you ever did?" I was being interviewed for something. Toughest thing you ever did? I said the last expedition I went on, because that's when your memory is the freshest, right?
Right,
And it's
right.
kind of that way in the things that we learn about ourselves. I try not to spend too much time on a day-to-day basis living in the past at what I've done, but
Right.
instead let those things that I've learned, and I've had some hard lessons. I've had a lot of close calls on expeditions, real close calls that have changed the way that I build my relationships outside of my family and stuff like that. Again, another layer of what's important in life and all those things. But I think a general overarching theme that I've taken from every expedition is that to never underestimate ourselves. That when really, truly, you think you are at the end, like it is there, you need a Hail Mary, like there's no way, it's never going to happen. There's always a glimmer of hope, that there always is a glimmer. And, through expeditions, I've learned to sort of polish that a little bit. So as hard as I try to be pessimistic, like I'm thinking to myself, no, it's done. We're done. We may as well pull the plug. And then there's like this little part in my brain that says, maybe not quite yet, And I think that comes from doing these things, and that so we can overcome a lot more than we think we can. I mean, there's a lot of things that perhaps we can't overcome in our lives, but in large part, we can overcome much more than we think, you know?
Do you have any fears related to running or adventure?
Not really. I mean, it's just I've been chased by wild boars on 2 continents. I've had snakes come at me. I've had giant spiders on me. All these crazy things. I've had parasites many times. You have these things are happening. It's kind of like frostbite so many times. Yeah, am I afraid? I mean, if I was afraid of one animal I'm terrified of polar bears. Terrified. I had a meeting with somebody the other day, and they said, well, how big are they? I said, just imagine a minivan, a white furry minivan bearing down on you that wants to eat you. I mean, that's it. So polar bears are to be respected completely. And I've spent a lot of time in the Arctic with friends of mine and learning, but it's the land of the polar bear. We have to respect that area when we're in it. And I have such deference, like such reverence for the polar bear, and I'm very aware that I am simply a visitor. That's all I am, and we gotta you gotta keep it in check, who's really at the top of who's the apex hunter in this game, so
Absolutely. Especially with something that big, right?
yeah.
So we have a question from Bobby. He's asking, can you tell us what your most important piece of gear is on your runs?
Most important piece of gear on my runs would be the shoes, obviously, right? On a day-to-day run. No, but seriously, and not to be, I'm not being trying to be coy or anything, but the shoes really are critical on a day-to-day perspective. And this is something that I've talked a lot about and people find so interesting, is that I wear road shoes pretty much for everything I've done. So, when I ran across the Namib Desert from South Africa to Angola with Stefano in 2018, I was wearing Skechers road shoes. I wear the Razor 3s, and that's what I wear, and I wear them on trails, and they've done some custom modifications for me and at times when I've needed it. But for the most part, off the shelf, Razor threes, that's what I run on. Doesn't matter how gnarly the trails are. And I prefer that. I like the flexibility of the shoe. I find I have more traction on rock, and it just, it works for me, right? On expeditions, I would have to say it's between my down puffy pants, which I get a lot of ribbing about, or my down. I have a lightweight down jacket, and both were made by Canada Goose. But my down puffy pants they made for me, and they're like Michelin Man pants, but they pack down to like about this big, and they're so warm when you're at camp that it's like you know, I get into those things. It's like wearing a sleeping bag. It's like walking around with a sleeping bag on you. Can you think of a more magical thing?
No, especially if you got to keep warm, right? In that cold.
Exactly.
Thanks, Bobby, for the question. Ray, what type of advice would you give someone who was looking to start having their own adventures?
Oh, you know what? The number one piece of advice I have is don't be afraid to step out and do something and find an adventure, especially in our own backyards. We've all heard about that, you know, adventure in your backyard. There's so much to do, especially where you guys are, where I am. You know, there's a tremendous. We live in the outdoor capital of the world is Canada. You know, we have just so much variability across the country and where we can go and what we can explore and what we can do. But planning an adventure, really from step one, is not to be embarrassed to do so, but to make a list. You know, make a list of the items that you need. Yeah, I'll tell you who's amazing at it is I do it all. I have a gear room and I have these bins, and I start planning. I put things in bins that I think I'm going to need. And then I got all these bins. And then before an expedition, I start going through. But my wife, Kathy, does these 200-mile running races, and and she's like a sciencey person with her job. And she'll make lists and flow charts and maps. And it's like way the other end of the spectrum, right? But you know, there's some genius in writing things down. So what I would suggest for people first steps, if you want to plan an adventure, let's say you were going to go and do the West Coast Trail in BC, which is amazing and beautiful. You could, or go and do either the whole thing or a couple of days on the Bruce Trail, which is not too far from you guys, right? Is to, first of all, define what it is you're going to do. Be very clear with what it is that you're going to, and how you're going to do it. Supported, unsupported, and then that determines the gear you're going to need. And then you start writing down the things that you might need, and you look in your closet and you see how much of it you have, right? So from that perspective, a logistical perspective, that's kind of how you start. With the training for something, it comes once after you define your goal, and then you start working up to it.
Cool. So, and you kind of touched on my next question because you brought up Kathy, but in your book, Running for My Life, your last chapter is called The Ultimate Victory, and it's about you and Kathy getting married. And many of our successes are in part to the support we get from our loved ones. And so how important has that been for your running career?
Oh, I mean, tremendous. I mean, when Kathy and I first met, she was a runner, but she just started running ultra marathons. I would think, I can't remember the exact year she started running them, but it's like in the last, let's say 10 years, right? And she loves it. And so, and you know, yeah, it's the support network that you have is critical. We are two different people when it comes to, you know, Kathy's very organized. Her job, she's a consultant. She does heavy stuff, you know, that involves, you know, a bit of science and organization and all this stuff. And then I'm like out here, right? Doing my job is like this. And so right away from the get-go, you've got two different people doing two different things, but the commonality is this, we love to do these ultra distance runs, and she goes and she does these ultra distance runs, and she does it the same way that I would do it, or anyone else that loves these things. So, you know, that's a critical piece, right? But I think you support one another. And at one point, there was a point at some point, I can't remember when, where if Kathy now is training for an event and it's leading up to an event and she has a long run, well, that long run takes precedence. And so I can work my schedule around her long runs. That's because she has a more strict schedule with work than I do. Right. And then I tend to do most of my training during the week. And the same thing, when I'm training for a big expedition, she gives me that leeway to be able to go and do the training I need to do, and then you know, she's running interference with the kids, right? But since, you know, now the girls are older, running with the girls is not like, honestly, I don't, parents brag about their kids all the time, but it's not like you're running, doing some kind of recovery run. I used to wear my running sandals. I would pair these running sandals, the Luna running sandals. And I like running them, and just, you know, it's nice and relaxing, and, you know, go nice and slow and let your feet spread out. I used to go on the trails with the kids after my runs, and I'd go running in these sandals. Forget it. I'd kill myself if I ran in those down. They fly, they run like adults. They're flying. And so, you know, it's like a second training run for both Kathy and I when we're running with the girls. As a matter of fact, on Sundays now, I don't even do my own run. When we do our long run with the kids, it's like, no, I'm not. That's the only run I'm doing. I can't run after I run with them now. I'm too tired, you know?
They just did 20K last weekend, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
They
good.
did. Yeah. 12 and 9 years old. And they
Wow.
ran 20K. And by running, I mean, they literally ran every step. There's barely any walking going on. Just at the end, a little bit, legs were tired. It was a lot of deer flies and stuff like that. So, but otherwise, and a solid, you know, I'm bragging here, but it's like a solid 1,700 feet of elevation too on
Wow.
trails, technical trails. Yeah.
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah.
Oriana, you had a question?
Hi, Ray. At the height of COVID, you gave a Facebook talk on your page about perseverance and training for the right now, and to keep focused on what you can do right now and not worry about what's going on in the fray. What tools or coping methods do you use to keep you from quitting or pulling the plug? You touched on it briefly earlier, but what coping methods do you use from pulling the plug or waiting it out long enough for that glimmer of hope that you mentioned to come through?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that has changed over time for me, to be honest, Ariana. Now I'm at a point where when I'm on expeditions, and I'm very aware of this now, it's funny because what you're asking me, and it's very hard to put it in words, has become something that is almost intuitive. But I'm noticing that I get less stressed out about those things now, right? So there'll be a roadblock, and where it used to be like I just lose it, like I just think to myself, oh great, now I'm like, well, there you go, now what are we gonna do about it, you know? So it's like, you know, what are you gonna do? It's happened this way, and so now we got to find a solution. And there's sort of a calmness and an approach that's changed the way that I'm sort of, you know, approaching how things, like how can I change the direction of where things are going. Like in COVID, it was overwhelmingly a time, especially in lockdown, where the uncertainty was so ridiculous. We didn't know anything, right? Like we didn't know if the kids were going to go back to school. You could be certain about nothing. The only thing you could be certain about was that everything was uncertain. That's what the only thing you could be certain about. And so that is such an overwhelming burden to take on. So instead, we would look to in our house each day, like we went on this kick for a long time, and Kathy suggested we may go back to doing it so we could save money on groceries, is we were making a meal plan. So we were making a weekly meal plan, and the kids were helping make the meals, right? And so each day it was like, okay, so like this is our goal today. We're gonna make this dinner tonight. So we're gonna do stuff during the day to get us to this dinner. I mean, it sounds like the most random, lame thing, but it actually was really effective. Because this whole family, we all love to eat. And so, you know, we all were like, it gave us something else during the day to look forward to. And in the beginning, you're like, so big deal, it's a dinner. But like by 2 weeks in to COVID, you're like, this is a big deal. We're doing this, you know, like we're all excited now about dinner and we're super excited. So it's changing the perception and the perspective of how things are going and how impactful a negative is, as opposed to, you know, and turning it into something that could potentially be positive.
Great
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
All right, Rob, last question. You had a question, Rob?
Yeah, hi everybody. Hello, Ray. Nice to see you again.
Hello.
So like with COVID, races are canceled. We're having a hard time, you know, picking a goal. So I've been kind of thinking of starting my own adventure as well. I've come up with the idea of running the waterfront trail from Niagara to Cornwall. So I live in Niagara now. I grew up in Cornwall. My parents are there. So I think there's a real nice connection there. But I've never run a race farther than 42. I'm a marathon, I'm a road runner. So I just guess I have a question on how you would approach training. Is there a formula that is, you know, if I run 5-minute kilometers for 11K a day, will that translate to being able to run 75 kilometers a day at 7? Like, I just, those are my questions. Well, like, how do you approach training when you're looking at running like 75 kilometer days over and over again?
So, you know, it's such a great question, and it shows that you're obviously very insightful about this. You've thought a lot about it, but you're doing something that I think we all do, right? Which is, like, right away, we look at the ways that this is potentially going to go wrong. That, you know, you know what I'm saying? It's almost like reverse engineering it, but from the perspective of, well, it's got to be impossible to do because it's how many kilometers? It sounds like a long way.
I think it's
drive
like,
to Cornwall.
Yeah, I think it's like 750-ish.
Well, that's a long way.
Yeah.
Anything past 10 kilometers is a long way in my books, right? So it depends on how you look at it. So the reality is you can run a marathon. And you ran how many marathons?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Maybe 10-ish.
Maybe 10.
Exactly. All right. So your body's good at running marathons over and over. You run a lot. So if we just take that basic definition, you ran a lot of marathons and you run a lot, and we look at this, and on this trip, you're going to be running a lot. Right away, you have two things in common, or you have something in common with this trip that you want to do. You're going to be running a lot. So right from the get-go, you have the ability to do it. I think, and I'll tell you, now I'm very unconventional in my approach in how I train now. And what works for me may not be what works exactly for you. And we all find, because we're all individuals and there is no one program. That's what drives me crazy about, you know, comprehensive running programs that are cookie cutter programs. Beginner running programs, it's awesome to have an online resource where you can look at it and check it out and follow A to X, and then you'll be able to do Y and Z. That's awesome. But when you come to, you know, you've been running all this time, and, you know, you're looking at something that's really elaborate thing that you want to do. And rather than sort of looking at things from a one-way only, the formulaic perspective, you got to look at it from the perspective that, and I could offline talk with you a little bit about this, and we could, you know, help you steer it. But I train in an unconventional way. I train by elevation. I don't train by distance. So even though my expeditions, I'm trying to cover as much distance as I can daily, given the conditions, the heat, the cold, whatever it is, the whole parameters of the expedition, I rarely run long runs longer than 50K. When I do those few 50K long runs, and I typically do one shorter expedition or project during the year, or a big run that maybe, let's say that's 150 or 200K, and let's say it's nonstop, and it's like the Death Valley thing last year, for example, right? When I do those 50s, I am going with people that are faster than me, right? And I'm going out there and I'm working it, and it's typically purposeful. Like I'm doing something, like I flag. We have a 50K event, nighttime running event for Impossible Possible. That's a fundraiser for it, and I run that with my buddies that are ridiculously fast guys. And one of them runs a 29-minute 10K. These are really fast guys. And I'll go out and I'll work all night, putting flags in the ground, running with these guys that make it look easy, and we're just hammered into the ground. So I get a training effect out of it. I train by elevation. So my peak weeks, like I'm doing 120K weeks, you know, 110 maybe, but I train 1,000 feet every 10K. I try to do about 2,000 feet a day of climbing. I run on gnarly trails. That's what I run on because my expeditions are always unstable terrain. I mountain bike also a couple of days a week, very technical mountain biking. I find that really helps with my technical skills when I'm running. See, these are all different things, right? So, you know, you ask me, how do I train? These are examples of how I train for the expeditions that I'm doing that would not be what one would think. One would think that I'm doing speed work and I'm doing hill repeats and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. For sure, there's a place for that. And when I'm coaching people, even when I coach people that I take on, I guide people on expeditions with my guiding business, and I give them occasionally when I'm training them hill repeats and for what their circumstance is going to be on the trip that they're going. But you got to look at things from an individual perspective. And for what works for me, I'm telling you, these are just some of the elements that work for me. I do a lot of up-tempo running on trail. I do very, very few runs where I'm running at my easiest pace. Those are recovery runs from injury and stuff like that. I'm usually running a little bit faster. I'm giving you a really long answer, but what I'm trying to say to you is you need to put together something that is comprehensive to get you to the end goal, but without inhibition. You also don't need to be thinking to yourself, well, if I can't run 250K weeks in training, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this thing. It's just, I just don't believe that. I've trained hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. I did Kathy's program for Moab last year. She finished second. You know, she had 4 or 5 days a week to train last year. She ran 240 miles. I don't even know what that equates to, 400 kilometers or whatever, like virtually nonstop, stopping for breaks and stuff, right? And so you don't necessarily train the distances that you're going to run. And I'm saying this again in case when Paul posts this, you know, because somebody will say, oh, that's not, you know, look at everybody's got their programs. What's going to work for, you know, Kilian Jornet is not going to work necessarily for you. You got to approach it from an individual perspective, you know, and you have to really look at the fact that you already have this awesome base, and what you're talking about doing is a huge run. Both of those things are the same. There's no doubt you can do it. Now, let's figure out what happens here to here. Like, what's the gap in the middle? How do you fill it in? But I don't believe that gap in the middle means you having to do 400 kilometer distance weeks and stuff. Like, you just don't need to be there. You need to train with quality, and it's always quality over quantity.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks so much. Oh my gosh. You know what? I would have thought you were running 400 kilometer weeks. Like,
No, I don't.
You're all sorts of awesome.
Too busy to be running for. I mean, you know, it's just, and I used to run potentially more. I'm trying to think about this. You know, maybe I ran more volume in earlier days, but I'm training so much smarter now. And also, I'm not 28 years old. I'm 51 years old. So in order to recover and get the most bang for my buck in my training, I train hard. I know it works. I know how best to recover. And then I hate to use the word term cross training because it's not really, but doing these other activities like alpine touring in the winter, classic cross country skiing. It's Mecca here where I live for cross country skiing. That's another thing that my kids do that forget it. Kathy and I don't even bother trying to keep up. And then fat biking in the winter, you know, through technical trails. So when I'm, you know, if you notice, I dropped that because my expeditions are in difficult terrain. Everywhere I go, the thing I did in January in the Arctic, gnarly terrain. It's never flat. It's always doing this. I ride my mountain bike in terrain that's like this. It's very difficult. The conditions are always difficult or near difficult because I want to replicate in my training and for it to become comfortable for me to be in that kind of terrain. Another great analogy that I can give you with training is my daughters really don't know any different. From the time when they were babies, we'd be out hiking with them in the baby carrier pack. Well, with the little one, let's say, was in the baby carrier pack, and the bigger one was already, you know, they're 3 years difference. And we'd take the little one out and we'd set her on the rocks, you know, and she'd fall down on the rocks and she'd get up and she'd walk and she'd scramble around and all that stuff. And we'd put her back in the backpack and then up we go. And then as she got older, she no longer had to be in the backpack, and now she's walking on the rocks with legs this long, right? You should see them run now. They run and they float over stuff. Their technical skills are perfect. If we get onto a really sketchy downhill, their strength to weight ratio is better than ours. They have tremendous lungs and strength from running up and down hills from the time they're babies, and they have zero fear. So they just go flying down the downhill mountain bike runs. We can't keep up. And there's a comfort. And you say to them, does that feel really fast to you? Does it feel? And they say no, because they don't know any different. They've become so accustomed to what it is that they run in that now when we go on family adventures and we go on trips and the terrain is gnarly, it's not so bad for them. You know, we go to the Adirondacks and the mountains, it's not so bad. You know, it's fun unless they're having a bad day, you know? That's the training analogy I'd give you.
Awesome. Great question. So every time we do a Runversation at the end, we do a quick Zoom questions that we just ask questions and we get short answers because I know the time is running out too. So I'm going to ask
Short
you some
answers.
questions. Yeah,
Forget
short answers as quickly as possible.
it.
So you ready? Are you ready? All right. First question. What's the worst frostbite you've ever had?
Fingers, you know,
Fingers?
oh, my face. This year in the Arctic, in my face, my eyelids got frostbit. Oh, I wish I could show you a picture of my face. Go on if you guys are on Instagram, follow me on Instagram and you'll see, and go down my page and you'll see a photo of my face all swollen up, maybe 10 or 15 photos ago. That was my face frostbitten.
Well, and to that point, I have added all of Ray's social media, how to connect with him online on the chat room there. Two or three things that you could be described as the most amazing things you've seen while running.
Well, a lightning bolt strikes in the Sahara that were like glass shards sticking out of the sand.
Okay.
A section of the Sahara Desert that was petrified forest. So that was extraordinary. Like it was like in Libya, I think, and it was just a forest laying on the ground, but it was all stone, like it was all petrified. That was pretty amazing. I think just being in the Canadian Arctic and looking at Thor Mountain and Asgard and the Turner Glacier and all of these things while the Northern Lights are going off, like in a Mars photo, but you're surrounded by the great walls, the great granite walls, right?
Wow. One person who's inspired you to push your limits.
My brother.
Brother. Finish his sentence. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a blank when I grow up.
Oh, astronaut, of course.
Oh, me too. Me too. There we go. Ever had any hallucinations while running?
Many times. It's tons.
What's one piece of advice that you give your younger self, if you could?
Don't change anything. That your life trajectory and your path is what it is, and you learn from those things. Like if you go into a room and it's dark and you turn on the light, what do you have? Intense light. If you were born into a lit room and it was always lit and then one day somebody turned the lights out, you'd be freaked out, right? Because you'd never know what the darkness is like. So it's good to have both. It's good to have a little bit of dark. Don't ever change anything on your path. Just always try to improve.
Interesting. Is there anything that you would say that's impossible?
Me singing. If you ask my wife, she can sing to the babies. I used to sing to the babies when they were babies, and they'd be screaming and crying, and they'd wake up, and it was just not, no, it wasn't that bad, but it's bad.
That's funny. And so, what's up next for you?
I have a couple of expeditions planned. You'll see them. I'll announce them on social media because no jinxing, knocking on wood right now. So I'll be talking about those soon. I had planned a couple of big trips this year. I was supposed to be down in Death Valley right now, doing another project down there, but due to COVID and the situation, I'm not there. All of the races that I host in the area that I live, I organize a series of races with some friends, and they've all been canceled for this year. So I don't like putting things out, right now until we know, you know what I mean? And yeah, we've got a youth-based expedition with my foundation too that we're planning in September. Let's hope it doesn't get canceled. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, Ray, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight. I really appreciate the time that you took to answer everyone's questions, talk about your journey to where you are now. And, I think, I've told you before, I followed you since you did the Sahara. And when I met you last year and I talked to you about, wanting to potentially do, 100K, you looked right at me and you said, oh yeah, you can do it. And the fact that you just looked at me with just total belief that I could do that really speaks volumes of the type of individual you are. And so I appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for being so patient with my long answers tonight. And, if anybody has any questions, I always get back to people. Sometimes it takes me time, but I always get back to people eventually. And so, Paul, I think you put my links in there. I have a website. It's just myname.com. Yep. And my social medias, all my social medias, the ones I use, have a little blue check beside my name. Those are those pages I use all the time. So you'll find those. And yeah, awesome. Hope to hear from all of you soon. And I hope that all of you, wishing everyone a COVID-free year in 2021.
Thanks, Ray. All the best to you and your family.
Okay. Have a great one, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Ray.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
You too.
Did the what?
Thanks, Ray.
Who's Ray? Where is Ray?